It's time for another retro game review. Tonight, we break out Mattel Electronics Intelligent Television. Action buttons on both sides of the controller, 16 directional movement, and number keys galore. Welcome to episode 2, and welcome to the Intellivision. I hope you're ready for some fast-paced, hard-hitting action. Oh, slow-paced card-hitting action. It's Las Vegas Poker and Blackjack. My first retro game review here was for Combat for the Atari 2600, a launch title and longtime pack-in. I wanted to do something similar for my first Intellivision game review, and this casino-style card game cartridge fits the bill. I would have preferred to review Armor Battle, as it's more comparable to Combat and still an early release for this console. It could be interesting to have compared and contrasted it with Combat. However, I don't own a copy of Armor Battle at the moment. That ended that dream. Being the pack-in for the Intellivision for quite some time, though, Poker and Blackjack can fit in nicely as my first review of a game for this console. As I did for my Combat video, I highly recommend you watch the Atari Archives relevant video, this time the one for the Intellivision launch lineup. Link in description. Alright, well, let's insert the cartridge and power. Before we began, one issue I had during some of my recordings, I was getting some graphical glitches. They appear to be related to my console and not the specific cartridge, as I tested it out a few times with multiple carts. I was able to capture footage for this review, but I may need to crack open my console and do some maintenance in the near future. The game manual is not too incredibly relevant, especially if you have general knowledge of the card games included. But this is a game you probably want to have the controller overlays for. Of course, in the internet era, having the physical overlays, or manual for that matter, is far less critical than it would have been in the contemporary setting this game was published in. You have a few game options: 5-card stud, 7-card stud, 5-card draw, blackjack, dealer's choice, and same game. The last of which I assume requires you to actually play a game of something first. Actually, I tested out before publishing the video, but in my EVAD-esque absent-mindedness, I'll forget to rewrite the script, or forget to record the audio, or both. I'm going to assume you have some familiarity with the rules of these card games, because if not, under what circumstances did you ever end up watching this review? I suppose persons passionate about all things Intellivision get a free pass on that question, but the rest of you, really? Really? My youthful experience does not apply here. I had very, very limited experience with Intellivision in my youth, and even as an adult. Card games in a video format didn't really have any appeal to me until I was in my early teens, and that passion faded drastically by my late teens. So as a youth, unless I was exposed to this game during that narrow time range, I probably would have had complete disinterest in it. The look. Without context and without having played the game, I wondered why Mattel would decide to pack in a poker game with their console. At the time of release, home gamers already had an option on the Magnavox Odyssey and 2 options on the Atari 2600. Paying incredible prices, $300 USD and $1979, you can adjust for inflation yourself, as I don't know what year you are in while watching this. But yeah, paying incredible prices to get a pack-in that isn't very distinctive from options already on the market for consoles you may already own and are therefore paid for? Well, one look at the dealer and you can already see, from a contemporary perspective, what sets this game apart from those pre-existing options. I'm not saying the dealer converted hordes of Atari owners to television, but the subtle and not so subtle facial expressions show off in nearly a subconscious manner that the Intellivision was a superior home console to those already on the market. So much detail goes into the dealer. His wild eyes, creepy 70s mustache, and mannerisms that change based on what's going on within the game. It's great. You can actually find yourself trying to read his face. something you would do with an in-person competition, even with what today would be considered very primitive graphics. Another standout with the look is the card animations. The dealer actually deals them out to you, rather than a computer just spawning the card for you. It doesn't have any impact on the gameplay, and it could have easily been omitted due to lack of cognizance. But the developer realized it could be done, did it, and the game looks better because of it. The cards themselves aren't that interesting, cool, or even all that good looking, in my opinion. Some are just barely distinct enough to know what you have, although recognition does improve over time. I suspect this will not be an issue for anyone who plays this game regularly. Type of person I'm not sure that even exists today. As far as appearance is concerned, I'd say it's good. I'd prefer the card sprites to look a little better, but it's not a complaint that I'm passionate enough about to daydream about building a time machine to go back in time and ask, "What's wrong with you?" to the developer. While that statement seems a bit odd, I have fantasized about such things before. Just not gaming related things. The sound. Limited. Not significantly distracting, not amazing. By knowing some of the audio that this console is capable of, the sound is a bit of a letdown. However, it is not to be ignored that early releases for any console often feel in some ways to be significantly inferior to releases near the end of that said console's lifespan. And besides, how much sound are you going to expect playing cards? I'll rate the sound as acceptable. The console can do way better, but just because it can doesn't mean it should. The controls are easy to understand, with overlays. There's not a lot of precision or execution that matter here. As long as all your number pad keys work and at least one direction on your directional disc can recognize inputs. Sorry for putting those qualifiers in there. It took me a long time and much maintenance to get the controllers on my Intellivision good enough to make any game remotely playable. I'm not going to complain too much. I purchased this Intellivision a couple years ago on eBay from a Canadian couple that were unable to test it, and they sold it to me for a pretty good price. But yeah, the gameplay is fine from a control standpoint, because you don't need to control a whole heck of a lot. This is not a platformer, and it doesn't need to handle like one. Where the gameplay does suffer, though, is in the pace of the game. It is painfully slow. While it may have been cutting edge in electronic poker and blackjack back in 1979, 1980 for a more formal release, I have a difficult time thinking anyone in the era would have had a reason to play this. Aside for those few that just needed their card fix and didn't happen to have a complete deck of cards in the house. I suspect anybody who did enjoy this back in the day was more interested in the novelty of it, and not by any means thinking it's a better gambling experience than playing with physical cards. The controls are fine, but gameplay still manages to be slow, and I need an adjective. Similar to clunky, but not as rude sounding. Someone in the comments section grab a thesaurus and help me out here. Other. One interesting thing I found in the manual is the following snippet about the dealer. Remember, he's computerized. He talks to you by means of cartoon balloons. Just a byproduct of a past era that I find some degree of humor in today. That someone in charge of the instruction manual felt this needed to be spelled out. Felt this needed to be spelled out to their clientele. The one-player experience. This game is meant to be played with someone, and due to the single-screen nature of the setup, it means when playing with someone, you must ask them to turn away so you can look at your own cards. Or you could just play knowing what the other player has hidden. I suppose it's up to you to agree upon. The one-player experience isn't hindered too much, however. You take turns playing, so if you don't mind being two people, it's playable. The downside being one of the players you control may end up being dealt a card you wanted for your other player. I feel more sophisticated poker players could really get a kick out of card counting strategies playing this way. You know, knowing what 2/3 of the participants have in their hands. I haven't come across any jokers in my dabblings with this game. Evidently, the highly fashionable dealer removed them from the deck. But I retain hope that, should I ever find myself playing against a satire-induced recreation of James Bond, that the rules for Drawn Stud Poker will work its way into the deck. Relevance today. In a single word, obsolete. Who would like this? I can only imagine people with a lot of nostalgia for it, people who love all things in television, or people who have a desire to seek out as many various blackjack poker options as possible would find this game fulfilling. It's neat to visit, and I'm glad I explored it for this video, but I suspect the percentage of the population that will buy this cart, play it, and enjoy playing it over and over is indistinguishable from 0%. Hey, here's your opportunity in the comments section to tell me why I'm wrong and why you are one of the many members of that 0%. Overall, the look is good and the sound is acceptable. It controls fine and the gameplay, although slow, is fine. That stated, I don't see this as a game I will ever really revisit. I had a lot of enjoyment with these types of games on PC in the mid-90s, and if I ever have an itch to play something comparable, the modern era has plenty of options. I would most likely just download an app if I felt the need to poker it up by electronic means. This is a decent game for its time, but as I just mentioned in the Relevance Today section, I can't come up with a more fitting word than obsolete. Next, Atari's answer to Intellivision's 16 directions of control, number keys, and overlays. Let's break out the super system. See you next mission.